Good evening. Welcome and thanks for coming. I have to thank, where did Bob sit? Bob. I have to thank Bob for advocating for planning and for advocating for a dean's lecture on the planning topic. And so I'm very, very honored and pleased to introduce a longtime colleague, Fulong Wu, from University College London. And Professor Wu is a leading authority on Chinese urbanization, urban development, urban planning, regional planning. Fulong has written so many articles and books I can't really cite. But I know many of my students in the Chinese urbanism class are here. They are reading Fulong's work. And Fulong graduated from Nanjing University and with his PhD from University of Hong Kong, and has taught at University of Southampton in the geography department, and finally moved to planning in Cardiff University. And now he is the Bartlett Professor at UCL. And as you probably know, the Bartlett Professorship is a very prestigious chair professorship held by a number of planning scholars, including the late Sir Peter Hall. So Fulong is really a top planning scholar, not only working on China, but also on transitional cities around the world. And I understand Fulong for a long time also worked on urban analytics. He was actually very keen on automata. Am I pronouncing it correctly? I don't know if you still do work on that area, but Fulong is a multi-talented scholar. And so I'm very, very pleased to welcome him to talk about his most recent book, Urban and Regional Planning in China or Planning for Growth, published by Routledge. Welcome, Fulong.
Okay, thank you, Weiping, for your kind remark, and also thank you, Bob, for inviting me. It's a great honor to give this public lecture in Columbia. I would like to share with you some of my findings about China planning. And planning in China is justified by a very different context. And in a market economy, usually planning is justified for its function to reduce negative externalities, and essentially is as a police right to enforce development control. But it is very different in China. And under the centrally planned economy, planning was really used to allocate resources to support industrialization. And planning has always been thinking as a method to modernize Chinese society. And now, under the globalization and the market-oriented reform, planning is justified for its magic function to develop competitive cities. And so planning has a very different image in China. In UK, planning has a quite bad reputation. Planning is regarded as the enemy of the businesses. And people said the planning came under several neoliberal attacks. And as you can see by the remark of David Cameron, our former prime minister, he said in the Conservative Congress, said, we are talking about enemies of enterprises, including the town hall officials who take forever with those planning decisions that can be make or break for businesses. So they regard planning as an obstacle to economic growth. But however, in China, planning has experienced significant development. People said since the 2000s, planning has entered the third spring. And we also call planning as a phoenix out of ashes and become a very prosperous kind of a profession. So why planning is become such a kind of a prosperous profession. In my book, I tried to offer 3 explanations. First of all, after the market-oriented reform, planning tried very hard to adapt into that new situation. So it adapted well and survived. And secondly, planning is used to solve the problem created by market transition, because market development created a lot of externalities, and planning has to deal with these problems. But I also offer the third explanation, that planning actually is used to create a discourse of growth, and which further legitimize the state power. So the role of planning in developing this growth discourse is critical in its survival. So let me first of all give you a brief introduction to the history of Chinese planning. China has indeed a very long history of planning. According to the book of Routledge, Chinese planning need to follow a particular standard when you build the city. But in reality, when you plan your house, you need to look at practical considerations. You place your house near river to access water, and you place your house at the southern slope of a mountain, and to fend off the cold winter wind. And in practically, when you scale it up, it has a certain kind of ratio and rules to build cities. And so when it comes to build the wall city, it has a particular type of forms. This is the smallest Chinese wall city of Shanghai County. And you can see that it has 16 gates. And unfortunately, the wall city was demolished later. But all these wall cities, at the center, you have a kind of a government compound which dominated the whole city. And when China entered the 18th century, 19th century, you will see that some cities have been fragmented into different parts. Like Shanghai, you will see this wall city, but also you see French concession area and the English settlement, and later it was expanded into international settlements. So the whole city was pretty fragmented into 3 different governance regimes. Some semi-colonial cities had seen the imprints of the colonial master, like the Qingdao in the northern China. You clearly see this German-style buildings. And in Shanghai, in the late 1920s, the Chinese planners wanted to create a new civic center, city center, to unify the fragmented cities, to create a new city. This is Shanghai new city center planned by the Great Shanghai Plan in 1929. And what's significant of this kind of plan is that for the first time you will see the creation of public buildings like hospitals and libraries, stadiums, as well as the city hall. This is a city hall built into Chinese style. It was unfortunately abandoned when Japanese invaded China because of war, and it stopped its building. But later it was used now as administrative building of Physical Education College in Shanghai. So it was sealed off from the public visit. And this was the Shanghai Library. It is a strange mixture of Chinese style and the concrete Western style. And when I visited there 2 years ago, you can see it was in a really dilapidated condition, and it was used by a middle school, and so it was not properly maintained. And similarly, in Nanjing, in the 1930s, there was a great plan it's called capital plan of Nanjing, because Nanjing was the capital of nationalist government. And that kind of plan introduced the Western modernist planning to lay out the industrial zones as well as commercial zones. It also proposed a central administrative zone. And the idea was pretty advanced, that is to use the commercial area, land development in commercial area near the Ming Palace to fund the grand project of this central administration. While in Shanghai in 1940s, late 1940s, you also see the expansion of urban plan, not confined to its city proper, but also to its region or the municipal area. This is the Shanghai land use plan, which was later adopted. And so you can see that planning has been an effort to modernize, to learn from the West. But unfortunately, because of war and because of this government fractation, conflicts, and all these efforts failed. And the planning adopted a kind of engineering style, a blueprint style, and it aimed to create a new environment, to create a new life. However, when it came to 1949, when the Communist Party ruled China, you will see dramatic changes. So I'll give some brief overview of this planning during the socialist period and its legacies. And you can see that since 1949, China experienced great transformations. A very powerful socialist has been created, and it developed unprecedented state capacity to organize production as well as social lives. But one thing continued, that is to modernize the Chinese society, but not through urbanization. That is not through building new cities or to promote consumption, but rather it achieved its goal through industrialization. And therefore, nationally, you see allocation of production forces across the nation. And during the Cold War, the concept of the so-called Third Front was created to preserve national defense capacities, because the coastal area and the border area were regarded as dangerous places, could be damaged during the war. And at the city level, you will see the expansion of cities to create the satellite industrial complexes learned from the Soviet planning principles. So outside Beijing, 10 the periphery kind of industrial residential complex have been created. And in Shanghai, the Shanghai regional plan shows the allocation of production forces to industrial satellites, satellite towns in the Shanghai region. However, during that period, in the socialist period, it was difficult to attract people to the suburbs. Suburb was really underdeveloped and only with industrial capacities. Within the cities, the socialist government wanted to improve living condition of working classes by creating so-called workers' villages. This is one of the famous workers' village in Shanghai. It's called Caoyang Village. It started 1952 over nine phases. The final phase was completed just before the economic reform. And it was really a kind of modest standard, terraced housing for workers. But at that time, it was really a big advancement in terms of living conditions. So it was actually a privilege for those families to move into these places. It was not for ordinary people. It was for model workers. So the model workers, when they moved into these new places, they enjoyed at least kind of new facilities and new living environment. But at the same time, China also learned from Soviet Union kind of residential plan to introduce super blocks. And this is one of the residential plan near the Ministry of Constructions. You can see huge blocks. And unfortunately, this kind of a layout was not suitable for Chinese winter because some of buildings were not facing the south. And therefore, it was not that popular. The landscape was rather monotonic. And unfortunately, the residential area, this project was demolished 2 years ago. And later, in the 1980s, the superbox style were upscaled into comprehensive residential areas or residential districts. This is one of the Beijing's residential project called Fangzhuang. It contains several clusters and planners design the facilities according to different hierarchies. And in Fangzhuang also, you began to see these high-rises in Beijing at that time. And however, the socialist period, the planning was mainly to create a new city image, urban image, to demonstrate the superiority of socialism over the capitalism. And you can see the adoption of this Soviet style. This is Sino-Soviet Friendship Center. Now it's Beijing Exhibition Hall. And you can see that the red stars, it was a metal red star, but it fell off in 1976, the earthquake. And later, worker never managed to put the heavy five-star red star. So now it's actually a metal, it's a plastic one. And the boulevard and also the square were used for political purpose. For example, marching and revealing a kind of a grand view of the capital. And most old urban areas remained untouched, actually, but not this one. This is Nanshi near Beijing Tiananmen Square, and it was renovated. But some people, some scholars criticize this as a fake kind of old courtyard housing. Actually, it's fake. But through these examples, you may think that Chinese, like socialist city, was really powerful and can create a new city. But in reality, it is a different story. This is because Chinese socialist city was really fragmented by different state work units. And the planning was really to implement national economic plans, and the whole urban sphere was fragmented by different economic sectors. And also there was a fundamental dualism between urban and rural areas. So planning is not for the public domain, planning is really for the state domain. And for the rural areas, there was little planning activity. And within each work unit compound, the subdivision was not supervised or approved by the city government. And to the city government, investment in the infrastructure was really a burden. Therefore, it was classified as non-productive. And in that kind of situation, also, there was no need to negotiate or to define a public interest because it all was within the state system. And so let me then describe the Chinese planning system to people may not familiar with the system. Actually, China has a very strange situation. It has 3 types of plan you can broadly categorize as urban plan. The urban plan, or the urban construction plan, is managed by Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development. That is the Ministry of Construction. And the land use plan is managed by Ministry of Land Resources. And the 5-year plan is under the National Development and Reform Commission, that is a planning commission. So actually the 3 types of plan were less harmonized in a way. And if you look at the planning, from 1949, city plan was originated from industrial site plan because you need to allocate the resources to plan the factories, therefore you have seen this kind of a city plan. And planning system consists 2 layers. At the top is master plan, at the bottom is a detailed construction plan. And only to 1990, China had its City Planning Act and to develop a development control mechanism. And in 2005, it has been revised, and 2008, the plan covered the rural area. It became an Urban and the Countryside Planning Act. So only in 1990, the Planning Act formalized development control. And so every factory or state-owned enterprise need to apply for planning permission. Before that, it was actually not the case. And in 2008, that kind of a development control was extended to rural area. But at that time, it became quite late because land use plan was controlled by Ministry of Land and Resources. And National Development and Reform Commission controlled capital approval, project approval. So therefore, Ministry of Construction actually didn't have significant power to regulate comprehensively urban development. So you will see this kind of urban plan with 2 layers, urban master plan and detailed plan. And through that kind of a system, you see the development of this development control mechanism. That is, for every project, you need to apply for planning permission, which is literally 1 note, 2 permits, land use permits and building permits. If it is a state project, then you will receive a note of site selection about whether it's appropriate to locate your project there. And above this system, there's also an urban system plan. But urban system is part of this urban master plan. And later, it actually led to the creation of so-called non-statutory plan in the 2000s. I'll elaborate this later on. Basically, Chinese planning system is more similar to the UK system. It is all planning permission-based system. But the problem is that when people apply for planning permissions, planners began to grant planning permission based on material considerations. But there's a weak link between whether you should give the permission or not, between the plan and the actual plan permission. And the urban master plan basically is a general layout of the function of land uses. A detailed plan is actual building layout. Like this residential plan, it specifies where the location of primary school and the community center, for example. And there are also a series of planning principles. For example, you need to allocate these facilities at the convenient location, at the entrance, for example, of this residential area. But in reality, although development control mechanism was set up, it's difficult to implement for several reasons. First of all, the plan is too general. It's difficult to decide whether you could grant planning permission or not. So therefore, later you will see there's a planning reform to introduce a kind of zoning style plan called Detailed Development Control Plan. A plan may cover limited coverage, Later, you see from 2008, it began to cover the rural areas as well. Planning lacked explicit control. Later, planner introduced various control mechanisms through red lines, green lines, and blue lines. And planning in general, it had a very weak legal status, and China also then experimented some kind of zoning practices. But the root, of course, of this lack of control is the rationale of development. Because the plan was supposed to allocate resources, plan is more pro-market, pro-development. And it has a kind of blueprint style for development. And in the socialist period, you will see the kind of deficiencies as well. Very often you have a kind of a utopian idea of planned development. And the master plan adopted a blueprint style. It generally prepared as a top-down processes. Through top-down processes, there's a significant administrative discretion in this planning permission system, insufficient public participations, etc., etc. But since economic reform, there are some notable changes. First of all, planning became more pragmatic to foster development. And planning is aligned better with local development goals. Planning began to strengthen its development control, although unregulated land use conversion is still common. And you also see more layers have been introduced into planning. But in reality, planning does not work well in terms of development control. For the reason, as I mentioned earlier, is because planning is not an enemy of growth. Planning needs to promote growth. When I think this, I think the reason is that in UK system, there's a significant issue of planning gain. The planning gain in China is really deposited in land sale income. And land sale in China, although you can say there might be some corruptions, in general, it is quite transparent. It's through land auctions. The benefit actually deposited into this kind of land sale revenue. And to such extent that planning negotiation is relatively weak or absent. Planning gain is not seen as a kind of form of benefit and invisible to communities. So communities does not engage sufficiently in the battle of planning. And communities are less mobilized to fight planning gain. And planning, therefore, does not set an obstacle for development. Therefore, it is not an enemy of growth. And planning is becoming a very popular profession. A lot of students want to study planning, and there are a lot of new planning programs created since economic reform. You can see this increase in the undergrad degree of planning. And many cities built exhibition halls to demonstrate this planning plan, to show the plans. Gigantic model in Shanghai Planning Exhibition Hall. You see the future of city. And in Beijing, Planning Exhibition Hall shows a very significant model here. And the new leader, President Xi Jinping, started his inspection of city from this planning exhibition hall. So there's a plate to commemorate his visit. So you can see planning is really occupied the central location, central position of political sphere. And since the market reform, a notable change is the planning has been reoriented towards this urban entrepreneurialism. And I would like to briefly introduce Chinese kind of a development model, which I characterize as a world factory model. It basically is using cheaper land to attract investment. When investment came, and you'll see labor, the influx of labor. And this kind of model really has some problem because labor was not counted as citizens, so that you have significant social inequalities and residential segregations. And land was leased out for the purpose of attracting capital. Therefore, you will see dramatic land expansion, excessive expansion of cities, spatial fragmentations. So in a way that the city was less organized and less planned. And planning has reoriented towards generate land revenue to promote economic growth. And so it plays a kind of positive role if you think in this way. And the local leader actually became the real planner. Although planners were contracted planning job, but when they sign contract, behind them are politicians who want to realize their aspirations. And also, under the urban entrepreneurism, there's a significant intercity competition. For example, one small county-level city, Kunshan, near Shanghai, set up its own development zones to compete with Shanghai, and Shanghai felt threatened, and therefore Shanghai set up its own kind of development zones equivalent to 173 square kilometers to fight back, to attract back the investors. And therefore you can see severe competition between two cities along the border. And for that city, Kunshan, it was really a rural county with a very small town. And in the late 1990s, the city experienced a dramatic expansion and attracted Taiwanese electronic manufacturing industries. And the city expanded very fast towards the east with the establishment of an economic development zone. And during that time, the problem of the city was excessive urban expansion. So the city government asked a Taiwanese consultant firm to prepare urban plan to solve the problem for them. And the consultant said, you need to have proper zoning. Some area you need to zone industrial, some area you need to zone into residential, etc., etc. But however, when the city government adopted this plan, they overturned its spirit. It says every part need to have industrial development. So you have suddenly see industrial development across the whole the territory. So to such extent that in 2008, when Kunshan began to prepare its new master plan, the urban spatial structure is look like this. Basically, it's a gigantic whole territory was developed. Although the southern part was zoned as what's called water landscape for tourism, in reality, this small town here, Chendon, was actually fully industrialized. And in some cities, consultants were employed to create a magnificent view. This is Zhendong New District, designed by a famous Japanese architect, and create an artificial lake and a circular tall buildings. This is a convention center of Zhendong. And this is a city proper. This is a Zhendong New District with an artificial lake. But late in 2008, the Zhengzhou government was extremely ambitious. It wanted to create a new city over this vast territory to link it with another city called Kaifeng. So between these two cities, about 70 kilometers, a new city will be created. And Arab was one of the consultants to create this eco-development project and even won a prize. But if you think of the scale of this development, it's truly magnificent. And in the rural area, this kind of a urban style development has been created and to attract tourism and under the so-called new countryside movement. And market reform also created a huge pressure on planning. And Chinese land use planning began to evolve into a more kind of a spatial plan, very similar to the trend in UK, where you see the creation of the fuzzy boundary planning known as spatial plan. And this kind of spatial plans in China are non-statutory plan. Sometimes they called conceptual plan. Basically, it provides a concept. But it creates also a problem for the planning system. Basically, how are you going to position them? What their legal status? In this kind of a conceptual plan, you will see the multiple actors involved in this plan creations. Usually, you have consultants, and planning is beyond a local. And the function of planning has also changed. It changed from resource allocation to place promotion, to attract investment and to serve industrial projects. This is one of the earliest conceptual plan invented in Guangzhou in 2001, when several teams came to Guangzhou, asked, what should we do? And the Guangzhou government said, you just basically provide a vision according to your understanding to allow Guangzhou to regain its role in the southern China as a central city, because it felt threatened by Shenzhen, the rise of Shenzhen. So the consultant said, look, we can create a new corridor towards the deep water port in Nansha and change the Guangzhou structure from the east-west access to the south to occupy the central location of the Pearl River Delta. All this kind of a competition. And also in Nanjing, you will see new town has been created. And planning has also been professionalized. Planning become consultant work, and usually it allocated through public procurement. And therefore, for the officials, it is a huge responsibility. You need to find the right person, right team, and otherwise you may end up trouble. So therefore, usually need to tender the top and specialized companies and national level on even overseas consultants. And also there's a timing issue, because usually the top leader require you to finish your job as soon as possible in 2 or 3 months. So it's a very tight schedule. And plan making becomes such a specialized kind of job. And you can't just do research and plan. You need to really deliver in time. So planning really changed from its pure technical activities to kind of planning events. In the past, when the government prepared a plan, it was a confidential technical document. But now, when government prepare a plan, it want to make it an event, important event. Everyone knows that we are making a huge plan, and we employ consultants to do that, because the task of organizing plan making is so complicated. Very often, you need a specialized agent to organize this kind of event. And therefore, you have specialized outsourcing units, even event organizers. It became more market-oriented. It became paid services. To less extent, it is involved the community through slow public participations. And also, you can see this kind of professional services for planning industries. This is the whole street along the Tongji University, you will see the development of this model making, providing 24-hour services. But now I know that some of these shops closed down because of this slow economic growth. Okay, so at the national level, we also see the proliferation of planning activities through upscaling the governance to provide a better control over the territory. Rapid urban expansion in China has created a severe environmental problem. This is urban expansion in the Yangtze River Delta near Shanghai over the years, and this is a heavily polluted river, Lianjiang, in Shantou. It was polluted by the upper reaches of these small towns, dismantling of these electronic products. And so the nationally, it wanted to create a layer to provide a better supervision. So you see National Urban System Plan. You also see Pearl River Delta Urban Coordination Plan, Yangtze River Delta Regional Plan, and also various kind of main functional urban plan. I'll explain it shortly. At the national level, you will see the creation of the Urban System Plan to designate the 4 major urban agglomeration areas, Beijing, Yangtze River Delta, and Pearl River Delta regions. And geography actually contributed significantly to these processes, because in order to proper plan, geographer needed to study the suitability of the local development. They provided this kind of suitability studies, and therefore classify some areas as suitable, some areas as ecological sensitive. Therefore, you need to forbid the development. So eventually, in the Chinese Academy of Science, they invented a very strange type of plan. It's called Main Functional Area Plan, which basically categorize the whole territory into 4 types of units. Some are prioritized for development, some are forbidden for development because it's ecological sensitive areas, etc., etc. And this is a national level designation of urban clusters. And in Pearl River Delta, urban expansion has led to the creation of coordination plan. The idea is not to let development sprawl over everywhere, and you need to create a regional core and several development belt in order to concentrate growth in along this growth belt. And also, a new mechanism has been introduced through, for example, green lines, through designated targets, and through better coordinations between local governments, for example, through joint mayors meetings, etc., and try to introduce some governance features to manage development. And at the regional level of Yangtze River Delta, you will see the creation of Yangtze River Delta Regional Plan, and to foresee the development of this coastal area in addition to this Shanghai-Nanjing growth corridor. So in order to proper allocate the growth across the territory. And but overall, this kind of a coordination plan is less successful because there's really lack of a main organization that is responsible for this kind of plan, implementing this kind of plan. You can draw on the map, but nobody actually implement it. And also the development, the coordination is less based on market mechanism. And although local governments said that they wish to collaborate, but in reality, there's no such mechanism for them to participate. And in a way that this kind of plan is less effective. On the other hand, more recent trend is for the central government to create new districts or new prioritized development areas at different locations. This is an incomplete map drawn probably 2 or 3 years ago. Now there are more this kind of a national level new districts. So another very obvious feature for Chinese planning is the creation of new towns and eco-cities. So let me quickly introduce some of these practices. New towns are created in 2004 Beijing Master Plan. There are 3 new towns created in the east of Beijing: Shunyi, Tongzhou, and Yizhuan. And for Yizhuan, you will see that it was developed from its rural town. There's a rural town, and Beijing Economic and Technological Development Zone was created by assembling land in this area. But later, the actual development area is covering the whole territory of several towns. This is actual Yizhuan new town territory. But in terms of commuting, in terms of people traveling, it covers even a further area. And all these new towns were aimed to attract industrial development. And so you can see that it's a kind of a post-suburban landscape. And also, it tried to create a business park. For example, DHL's headquarters, Nokia's kind of office centers also located in these places. So in a way that these kind of new towns are production sites as well. And in Shanghai, this is another new town called Songjiang New Town. It not only attracted an industrial zone, but it also created a university town. It also tried to create a very strange landscape with the so-called Thames New Town, try to mimic English market town style. So you can see that this Chinese kind of a new town following the English market town, England's market town style. This is another new town in the north of Shanghai, Jiading, following German style, because a German automobile factory located there. Although this, you can't see this from this image, but this really shows you the situation of this new town, very high density, high-rise development in the middle of the countryside. And this is another new town in Nanjing. It combined with the national sport event, National Olympic Game villages in Nanjing. This is a new town in Kunshan, the new town I mentioned earlier. It also attracted Taiwanese electronic production factories, assembly factories. And mostly, new town coexisted with urban area. China didn't see the deterioration of the urban core, but this town in Shantou is an exception. The central area of Shantou deteriorated significantly, while the city government tried to promote a new town outside. This is a model called Shantou Cape. The idea was invented by Paul Andrew, who was a designer of the airport Charles de Gaulle Airport, and also he is famous in China because he designed the National Theater. So the local government employed him to create this new vision for the government, for the new Shantou. This is the new financial district in Guangzhou. The Guangzhou government wanted to create this Canary Wharf in Guangzhou, so they came to London to learn and planned a very modern and high density kind of a area in Guangzhou. Some places it went wrong, like this Odus in Inner Mongolia. Many buildings left unoccupied, and it became a so-called ghost town. And some cities, or more recently, there's also a trend to create eco-towns or eco-cities. And this is Sino-Singapore Tianjin eco-city. And you can see that there are eco-features here. But most importantly, it also has real estate projects. This real estate project is called British Land. That's the project name. So in the Eco City Exhibition Hall, you will see it is basically a sales office. It lists a lot of properties and you can choose. And another eco town in Chaofeidian, the Beijing iron steel factory was relocated to Chaofeidian, and which created a new kind of opportunity for the local government to create its eco development. In Beijing, eco communities were created again by Arab design, try to combine some eco technology into this community development. But the most famous project is Dongtan. It was planned in Chongming Island near Shanghai, near wetland area. But its vision was really to create a more eco and low carbon development. Unfortunately, it was not materialized because of this difficulty of getting land quota permissions, and also the local developer told us that it also due to the cost of eco technology, because you will have to increase the property price, and the local buyer didn't feel that it is justified. Although it tried to depict a picture of Chinese future urban life. In reality, it has not been materialized. But to some extreme, some cities even employed foreign consultants to create very strange visions for future, not necessarily planners. Some people draw this picture to show the future of an eco town in a city in southern Jiangsu, with 5 flower-shaped kind of communities. The designer is nothing to do with planning profession. I don't know what's a planning profession, what's profession, but it was actually quite popular by the local leader. Said that, look, this looks nice, and this project was used to bargain with the National Development Reform Commission to set up a pilot site in this city in order to attract special policy. So it achieved its purpose in that way. But in reality, very often you can see all these eco-cities, eco-towns were really in the middle of nowhere, like this Wuxi new town. And this is a central area of Wuxi new town. But actually, Wuxi new town has some economic activities. It tried to create combined its activity with with creative industries. This is a Wuxi studio. It is a film site. The idea, again, planned by ERP, was to introduce eco-standard into zoning system. And if you want to develop a certain plots, you need to follow its eco-standard. So in a way that you can see all these examples, planning really become a leader, like a dragon head in the dragon dance. So it's so important. And New Town Plan is, if you like, a mega project. And it became an investment platform, and therefore it's easier to mobilize investment. And also New Town is popular because it's easier to organize planning, design competitions, because you have an object for people to try. And in a way that city plans become a kind of a so-called dragon head in the dragon dance. But the problem is this kind of a dragon head can be picked up and put down, and it can be changed along with the change of political leaders. And it really serves the purpose of kind of do place promotion. So let me finally reflect on planning under market transition. At the beginning, I offered 3 explanations why Chinese planning survived, probably because it adapted well in a new market environment. Probably it has to cope with new problems created by market development. But I want to emphasize the 3rd explanation, that is, planning is used to create a growth discourses. Indeed, you will see planning has changed a lot during the market transition. It changed from a technical physical design to a more economic vision and development declaration. Style has changed from the blueprint style to a more strategic statement or policy recommendations. And it also employ foreign or domestic consultants to do planning, and the planning product become a kind of a services, etc., etc. And in a way that planning has changed so much that planners became confused about their roles. According to this Mr. Yan Jinzhao, senior planner of Chinese Academy of Urban Plan and Design, and he was director of Xiamen Planning Bureau, and he now a professor in Xiamen University. He reflected on the role planning and said, now the role planner has changed. We need to lobby local government and sell professional knowledge to those cities who wish to adopt our advice. And the purpose of our service is to our client is to defeat other city competitors. This is now the new professional ethics of planners. So he tried to find a new job, a new role for planners. And you can see that in his advice of Guangzhou conceptual plan, it's really look like a battlefield kind of a plan to defeat Shenzhen to occupy the central location of Pearl River Delta. In a way, planning, according to that kind of jargon, it became more market-oriented and technically rational oriented. And planner also try to borrow examples from overseas. This is the first slow city in China, learning from the Città Slow movement in Italy, and it invited the vice president of Città Slow movement to visit this place and endorse this is the first really the first slow city in China. But unfortunately, when the vice president returned to Italy, he was murdered afterwards. I don't know what's the reason. But planning also created some kind of a new built environment. This is a Greenway in Guangzhou. It tried to learn from overseas, probably the green belt kind of idea, but added with kind of a recreational activities. So it does provide some good environment. So in a way that weather planning is during the market transition is really for the market. I think planning for growth is not necessarily equivalent to planning for the market. As I mentioned earlier, planning is really to create a discourse of growth, and in order to foster this competitiveness, it will strengthen the role of the state. The state has always been very important. This is a district government building of Nanjing Baisha district, and from this kind of a style, you will see it's kind of a new splendor to show the dominance of the state over the urban sphere. And planning has been used as an extension of state apparatus to operate in the market and to strengthen the formality and to remove the informal settlement informality. And with the rapid urban expansion and influx of rural migrants, you will see the expansion of urban villages or the villages inside the cities. But the planning has been active assisting the state to demolish these rural villages, to create new development zones. So what do we learn from China planning? As I emphasized several times, planning has become an instrument for growth. But how can planning become such an instrument? Probably we can think through the perspective of so-called post-political planning and along the market development. And the role planning has transformed from resource allocation to place promotion. Planning itself has changed, and it has been commodified as a consultant services, and to using more sophisticated models, and planning really become more neutral as it wishes, and it tried to create a more efficient, market-efficient forms, less political, less ideological. And for example, a lot of cities want to become rich, so unfortunately, due to mistranslation, Jiangsu province in its slogan said it want to create an opulence society, and a lot of cities try to become so-called pioneering cities or pioneering area places, try to become a kind of a occupying the pioneer position in the intercity competition. But really, weather planning is without political interference. The reflection of one Chinese planner indicates that well. He said, look, we have three types of plans, and although our urban planners tried very hard to cherish utopianism, but in reality, our plan became an accomplice of the home demolition and to create a lot of encroachment of agricultural land, to dig artificial lakes, and that's what we do. And in terms of land use planning, the idea was to maintain a proper kind of agricultural protection, but in reality, it used land use quota to generate land revenue in order to create money. And economic plan now become a kind of a approver of highly energy intensive and highly polluted projects. And that's the problem. And in a way that we see this kind of a transition, but we also see a continuation of Chinese planning. Chinese planning has been tried to foster growth under the notion of modernization. So planning for growth is a kind of planning for modernization. That kind of aim has not been changed. And in a way that Chinese planning has survived under that kind of a notion. But in long term, you really need to think more deeply the problems of growth and how you need to involve more deeply the society in order to legitimize the existence of planning. I think I'll end my talk by giving you a small story, because at the beginning, I talked about Shanghai Metropolitan Plan, or the Great Shanghai Plan. It planned a civic center, and this is a stadium, Shanghai Stadium. And I want to take some photo for my book, so I went there, and I was so concentrated about taking my photos until I was stopped by a private security guard. Said, "You are not allowed here." So I was surprised because I didn't expect that I would be stopped. And then I looked around, and then I found I entered a territory of someone else's territory. This is a whole new project of so-called intelligent community to foster innovation and research, combine research together. It's called 创智天地 in Shanghai. It was created by a property developer from Hong Kong who famously developed Shanghai's 新天地, or the new heaven on earth. And really, the place, this civic center, has been redeveloped, but the vision of civic center has not been fully realized, because the place is really become a private kind of a land with private secured guards. And so in a way that you can see the vision of civic center has been materialized, but in another sense, it has not been fully realized. I think that's the challenge for Chinese planning in the future. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay. We can sit down and take some questions. Thank you, Professor Wu, for a very comprehensive view of the planning system in China historically, as well as the richness he's presented for us, the contemporary, particularly the post-reform period, both the nature of planning as well as the challenges facing planning and planners. So let me perhaps take the prerogative of being the responder, perhaps ask you 2 questions, and then we can open up to questions from the floor. So from your presentation, Professor Wu, it's really quite clear that there is a very outsized role of local governments in the shaping of the built environment in Chinese cities, right? And in here, planning and planners become very much of a state apparatus, as you just said. And here, I mean, the local government is the landholder. As we know, our urban land is state-owned, as well as a developer, of course, often through partnership with private entities, as he showed in the last story, as well as regulator. Because if you look at the role of planners, it's across all 3 sectors, and then the 3 aspects. And then so here we're really looking at planning as you said, very, very eloquently, for growth. But as the Chinese economy, and particularly in the urban sector, that has slowed down since 2008, of course, the post-recession efforts in China have popped up a lot of infrastructure investment, but we do know in the last few years, I go back to China every year, you can see very clearly the slowdown in cities, and both in terms of growth, consumption, and market activities. As you mentioned, number of projects fell through, and lots of establishments have closed down. And so the mentality of the outsized role of local governments and the mentality of if you built it, they will come, right? As you can see from all of the new industrial parks, the eco cities, the new towns, the expectation has been that if you build it, the capital will come, the land is an attraction, and then subsequently you generate more wealth for the city. So that whole logic works in that way. But now the fundamentals of that logic is being shaken up, right? So my first question has to do with how do you see planning justifying or the planning profession or the local governments, the state apparatus, really justifying its sort of outsized role in shaping the built environment in this sort of new context of economic slowdown. And all projections are quite clear out that the Chinese economy is no longer growing at double digit. It's no longer growing at even 8 or 7%. It's actually go down to 5 and 6%. And as a result, growth is not the momentum that we're seeing now.
You're right. China has entered a period of slow growth, and it became slower than expected, actually. And now Chinese planners face a dilemma that they need to find a new way of dealing with the new problems. And now people are talking about urban regeneration instead of expansionist approach. So suddenly, a lot of people, a lot of government became interested in creating this new projects inside the city instead of in the suburb. But on the other hand, when economic went slower, and there's imperative for the government to maintain certain employment level in order to maintain social stability. Therefore, very often you will see real estate has been picked up. And each time when you see economic crisis, real estate price increases. And after 1997, Asian financial crisis, you can see Chinese government adopted a very radical approach to commodify its housing provision system. So you see commodity housing. And after 2008, global financial crisis, you will see the invention of this 4 trillion yuan infrastructure investment, and also the printing of money and the increase of property price. And last year, when China's economy slowing down, and again, property price increased significantly. So there is again a huge demand for planners to find a solution how you may actually to regenerate places such as urban villages. And although you have a lot of resistance from urban villages, and people became more aware of their rights, and it's increasingly difficult. So I think planners began to realize their job is more difficult than previously. Previously, you can draw up on the map and to show like this is a new area, a new town, but now you have to look more deeply into property owners and you have to deal with this resistance. And they began to talk about so-called community planning. So you at a more macro level, you need to involve community, try to build consensuses through whatever ways, either through generous compensation or through persuasions, whatever. And you need to do the job more properly.
So, that's really kind of an interesting development we're seeing, and it seems rather challenging to stop the growth machine in a sense. But we also know that in this sort of planning for growth regime, that a number of contradictions, have been created, really sort of in a sense are against some of the fundamental values that we hold as planners. For instance, what we now value a lot in the planning profession in the US and many other countries, equality and more sustainable way of livable cities. And just to sort of give you some of the examples Professor Wu has articulated, the land expansion, for instance, of cities has really encroached into a large, amount of arable land. So given the limited arable land per capita in China, it's quite shocking that I think a number of research has shown that there are about 50 or so Chinese cities, at least of relatively large size, that have now grown more disproportionately in land than population. So the expansion of land, sort of land urbanization, far outpaced sort of population urbanization. So that's one example. Another example has to do with, as Professor Wu also has shown, you begin to see more and more segregation and marginality in Chinese cities. So this, in a way, if you look back of the socialist Chinese cities, they were much more, in a sense, along the principle of egalitarian. Surely there was, surely there were problems with poor housing conditions and so on. But in general, cities in China 30 years ago were known to be much more egalitarian. So some of these contradictions really began to bubble up much more now that with this rapid growth, but very sort of inherent problems associated with the rapid growth, ghost cities, urban villages, and so on. So I would like to hear from you how you see these kinds of urban issues will perhaps push planners to think towards a more, not just pragmatic, but also less growth-driven calculation of planning the urban built environment.
I think you are right, because the era of expansionist plan will be ended, or has been ended already. Increasingly, planning in China will be used as a spatial fix to fix existing problems. So, for example, the central government began to impose some quotas and to constrain local expansion. And in particularly, there's a concern over the local government debt. And therefore, the various kind of methods have been invented, including the monitor the operation of local investment platforms and to constrain this kind of expansionist approach. And also, the central government regarded the integration of migrants into urban society as a major challenge, so requires local government to prepare some plans, or social plans, which is a new type of plan, rather than the physical planning, physical plan, to prepare some community level kind of integration. Also, China faced very strong pressure on its carbon emission, and therefore, from the central government, there's a requirement to prepare like low carbon plans, and recently, there's also an enthusiasm for the technology, like smart cities or using new technologies to create more sustainable city. So various approaches have been tried, and so you will see the change, the shift from the pure expansionist approach to more problem-solving approach. And also there will be more involvement of communities, not because of change of ideology that we should involve community, but in reality, you couldn't implement your plan to carry out your program without actually involve local community in a way that for example, the coordination between cities is another issue to avoid excessive competition between cities. And that's coordination, for example, in Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei area, so-called Jingjingji coordination plan. This is kind of a new plan created.
Great. So maybe we'll open to any questions, and yeah, I'll see some hand. Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate Dunham, and I teach a seminar that I worked in China and done many master plans, some of which you've mentioned, for city plans. And I teach a course that compares zoning of different systems from around the world. And namely, we really compare New York to China, which are drastically different fundamentally. And one of those big differences is the fact that China's planning for the codes, planning codes, are all set at a national level. And this sort of explains why cities look the same all over China. Whereas in America, every city makes its own planning code, and no two cities look the same. So I guess I'm wondering if you see any change towards giving cities more control of planning and making changes, or having the mechanisms to make changes to the fundamental codes that are set for the whole country. And if you think that is towards improvement or not, or does that make sense?
Yes, you're quite right. Because China very often tried to unify its practice, like the central government issue some standard to be implemented across different cities, and which can cause some problems because cities are very different from each other. But at the moment, we didn't see the change of practice. I think the central government still play a very significant role. It is not a federal system, so it's more kind of a, if you have planning regulations, it should be implemented everywhere, and that's a problem. And it's a problem particularly for the so-called first-tier cities and the fourth-tier cities. Shanghai, as a first-tier cities, may experience a property boom, while the fourth-tier smaller cities actually have surplus kind of a housing stock and vacant housing units. So the problem could be quite different.
Yeah.
The policy is fairly standard, and because you have worked in China for some time, you know this fairly well. That's a problem, I think, a local adaptability. I think fundamentally the problem is, although China developed decentralized economic decision-making, in terms of regulation, it has always been centralized. So the upscaling of governance has always been a trend.
Yep. So, Professor Go?
Thank you very much. I have two related questions.
You want to introduce yourself first? I don't.
I'm Qing Gao, a professor at School of Social Work at Columbia. My first question is, have you seen any changes in urban planning or planning in general since Xi Jinping became the president, given especially the anti-corruption campaign? How does that affect planning? Secondly, I know you also study migration, especially in relation to poverty and inequality. There's this new campaign, targeted anti-poverty campaign, 精准扶贫, and one of the main approaches promoted by the central government and adopted by many local governments is relocation of poor people. Is that considered by planning by the different locations? Thank you.
I think the first question, I did see planners become more cautious now, and they want everything follow procedure, because particularly through like a public procurement, and then through issuing contracts and preparing contracts, and it become more kind of procedurally aware than before. And the second question, I think relocation of poorer households. I haven't done any research on this, but I suspect it's more related to, in terms of planning, with infrastructure plan and to relocate households away from ecological sensitive areas, and so it could be part of infrastructure development. And so the idea was to combine the livelihood with the welfare distribution. So it's less about pure welfare distribution, but it's also a means to create some jobs or create some new living environment for the poor.
Mm-hmm. So I think Wang Lei and then you. Here Wang Lei had his hand up. Yeah.
Hi, Professor. I'm Lei, first year urban planning student. So I have a question about the real estate market development this year in China. So as we all know, in 2016, China has been implementing loose monetary policy to try to stimulating the real estate market development, to try to speed up the GDP growth pace that has been slowing down in recent years. So because of the crazily speeding up real estate market development, China has been experiencing a very serious debt crisis. So during my summer internship in China, I've been traveled to cities like Ningbo and Suzhou. And when I set foot on the city, on the first day of my field investigation, I was pretty much impressed by the local real estate development, because I've seen almost all of the major developers in China moved in the market of Ningbo and Suzhou and built up a lot of high-rise buildings, residential buildings in there. And as we all know, developers in China usually pays less attention to the greening of the residential projects in China. So when I set my sight on the projects built in the cities, the greening and the landscape was not designed in a very rational way. And all I see is all the high-rise buildings. So how do you see the new town planning, strategic planning that was developed by China in the new century play a role in the real estate development in China in 2016?
You're right. China has recently seen a rapid increase in house price, and it was deliberately fostered by the government policy as a measure to stimulate economic development. And the problem is that it has created a significant risk, and we don't know what level risk is. But one indicator could be alarming, because when you go to China, you see everyone talks about price, house price, and in the restaurant everyone talks about price, like talking about stock market in 2 years ago. So that's a problem. But we don't know really how risky it is. So recently, we just got a UK-China joint research grant to study financialization and its potential risk for the macroeconomic policy. And we will do some work in order to understand at the macro level to see actually what kind of leverage households apply when they purchase their house. And there's some kind of a rumor said people do use very aggressive kind of a leverage, but some developers said Chinese households or home buyers at least need to put down 20% the deposit, so it's less risky in a way. In terms of greening, I think during the rapid growth, less attention has been paid to the landscape or greening. But I suspect in the long term, there will be substantial demand from home buyers for greening. So the greening issue will be created by the market itself, by the housing market itself, that the potential market, the buyer will need to look into the level of the percentage of green coverage. For those lower green coverage projects, it might not easy to sell. So for that, as an incentive, a developer may actually introduce green features, landscape features.
Yes, there.
I have two related questions.
You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm a third-year MArch student here, MC Tang, and I have two related questions here. One is small, micro scale. The other is macro scale. So the first question is that the slowing down of Chinese economy is pushing China from an export-based economy to a consumerism kind of society. So I can imagine that in a city or the previous developed city areas, we have to restructure to stimulate consumption, whether we want it or not, but just to maintain the kind of reasonable growth, to maintain employment rate. I think that's probably what they're going to do. So the question is, what kind of specific spatial strategies other cities are doing to increase internal consumption? And the next question related to that is that once you have created a consumer-based urban, say, society, and also related to the comment that the planning for growth is ideology-free. From the Brexit referendum and the recent US election result, I fail to see that the urban-rural divide is ideology-free. So I want you to comment on that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the what is the first question?
The consumer.
Consumer, yes.
Yeah.
I think the difficulty of boosting domestic consumption is social inequality. Because of the severe social inequality, and it's difficult to promote mass consumption, because in a way that because a lot of migrants are not their consumption capacity is severely constrained by the lack of rights to the city, and that's a major challenge. So you'll see the turning to luxury kind of goods for some new rich. But on the other hand, there's a substantial demand to be released, and that it requires more changes in the social structure in order to incorporate migrants in as effective consumers, because because in the commercial or commodity housing market, you can't imagine the rural migrants as home buyers. They are not home buyers, they are just renters. And the second question is about
Ideology free.
it pretends to be value neutral, and we just promote growth. Growth is great, and or sustainability. Sustainability is great. So in a low carbon, smart kind of plan, and we almost promote this kind of a efficient way of provision of services. But in reality, it is not. All the smart growth has social implications, and the smart growth can exclude some of social groups by its nature, and sometimes deliberate. And for example, in terms of this kind of a so-called innovation communities, and regenerate the place and replace it with new social groups through gentrifications, and it has quite profound social implications. It's not value free.
Yeah, let me just also add, I think you raised a really, really good point in terms of some of the solutions, or perhaps resolutions of some of the urban problems, has to do with rural land ownership regime, that the Chinese central government has come short of allowing farmers to actually have full control of their claim to the land, and in a way ties them continuously to a split household strategy that they need to be half a foot in the cities and half foot in the countryside. And you can say that actually perhaps saved the Chinese cities from having lots of squatter settlements, but it really is a two-tier society in the sense that there is the urban citizenship, then there's the rural citizenship. Deepa.
Hello, Professor Wu. Thank you so much for that very palpable spatial design history in such a short time of China. What really struck me was at the very end, you shared your personal anecdote about the materializations versus realization, and also you discussed the rise in planning education throughout China and the exponential rise of that. And you also, throughout your presentation, mentioned a number of tensions, so sort of the tensions around gaining permissions, social tensions that you're talking about, and also the strategic sort of planning in the commodification of planning, these sort of large frames of discourse. So I guess my big question is, what is the planning, what are the discourses in the planning education there? So I know here a large percentage of our student population is from China, and we talk a lot about social, political, economic tensions here at GSAPP in the planning department. I'm wondering in what ways do planning schools in China engage with some of these other questions of planning?
That's a very good question. In China, planning originated from physical plan, so the training was more about design and the physical and technical side, so-called technical rationality. But later, China also see this introduction of this urban science, urban studies, but it more it regards the planning as scientific efforts, so emphasize a lot of kind of technical issues as well through GIS through scientific methods to investigate a problem, and then you solve the problem through scientific methods. So scientific methods has been highly emphasized. To less extent, it is about social justice, about political power redistributions, but people began to talk about this recently. And there also, in some universities, particularly in large universities, there's an increasing concern of the social problem, and also environment problem as well. So the scope has been expanded. I think that's why a lot of Chinese students go to abroad, come to North America, to Europe, to learn some new concepts, new ideas.
Yeah, Bob.
So, towards the end of the talk, you started to, you talked about the post-political. And I thought that meant the shift from a kind of socialist planning to a market-oriented planning. But that didn't strike me as post-political. Because if I understand it correctly, it was the state that shifted. And the planners just followed whatever the state wanted it to do. And so it wasn't that the planners somehow disengaged from the state. They were always engaged from the state. And this strikes me as very similar in the United States, in England, in Finland, in South Africa. Planners are state planners. They're very tied to the state. And the interesting question is, what autonomy do they have from the state? What ability do they have to give a direction to the state that the state might not want to take? What ability do they have to do something that the state might not have thought of? So that's my question. Can you speak to the autonomy of the planners from the state?
That's really a fundamental question. I think from China's perspective, there are 2 points. The first, post-political notion is not easy to be applied because there's no post. There wasn't a democratic political participation processes, so there's no such kind of post. But there's also second point related to your question is about the autonomy. I think the limited autonomy, although planners try to promote the technical rationality of their job or their scientificness of their job, but in reality, it has always been closely integrated with political missions and wishes of the political leaders, and planners themselves fully understand this. Therefore, planners say, if you want to learn, you also need to learn something out of your textbook. So your textbook teaches you there's a procedure, but in reality, you need to go dinner with political leaders, and in order to understand, or even go dinner with secretary of political leaders in order to understand what's the mission this time, why we are asked to do this plan. So you needed to fully understand the intention. So in a way, it's never kind of independent, technically neutral, and away from the political interference. It is a political process.
Right, in the back, maybe one last question.
Hi, my name is Kathy, and last year I wrote my thesis on urban villages in Beijing, using a lot of your work, and now I work as an urban planning consultant. So this presentation resonated with me on many levels. I'm interested, sort of in the question, I guess. given the economic slowdown, and also having sort of done a lot of research onto migrant communities in urban China, the pressure to provide the affordable housing in our cities. And so in New York City, this past year, we got rid of our 421A tax abatement, which encouraged a lot of private developers to provide affordable housing in their new developments. And now there's sort of a conversation in the real estate industry about whether all affordable housing development will sort of cease and be without private support. From your presentation about sort of the role of the government in planning, the state as both the planner and a real estate developer, I was wondering what your thoughts are about the unique role that state planning can have in providing affordable housing in ways that we don't see in the United States, and what sort of the discourse is on that in urban China.
That's a very interesting question, because in China, the state tried to provide affordable housing through large-scale construction of so-called affordable housing in the pre-urban area or periphery of the city. And this kind of a large-scale affordable housing estates very often create some problems for households, and because it's away from job locations. But on the other hand, there are sources of affordable housing, housing in the urban village. They are really affordable because they are created through this kind of a market demand. And very often they are at a convenient location and easy access to job market. And however, this formal plan very often try to eliminate this kind of a source of affordable housing, while on the other hand, try to create affordable housing estates. That's a problem. And I think at the moment we talk to some Chinese local government, try to find some pilot kind of projects, whether it's possible to do some incremental regeneration to maintain the source of affordable housing in urban village, for example. They could be used as an alternative source. And although there are a lot of constraints in terms of quality of buildings, safety standards, etc., but a lot of these kind of housing projects in urban village developed by the market are actually evolutionary. They upgrade themselves according to resident demand. For example, resident demand may require some connection to the mass transit stations, and the property developer or the owner provided some shuttle bus kind of for this kind of a connection, and they can therefore attract more tenants. And you can see it evolve, but the problem is at this stage, the supply, provision of affordable housing is complicated by Chinese model of land-based development. That is, you need to extract land revenue from land sale. So that creates a problem for affordable housing provision. That's the source of dilemma, I think.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
Professor Wu, and thank you all.